Today we're talking about Flood Zone X. It doesn't have to be scary and it doesn't have to be expensive. Today we're going to talk about how to save the most money in this type of flood zone. Hello, my name's Chris Green, president and owner of the Flood Insurance Guru, and I want to welcome you back to our YouTube channel where we empower people by helping them understand flood insurance and flood costs throughout different flood zones. Today, we're talking about Flood Zone X, probably one of the scariest flood zones out there. Today we're going to be talking about a few different things. We're going to talk about pricing, we're going to talk about coverages, we're going to talk about options, and we're going to talk about requirements. So first of all, before we get into any of that, we got to talk about what exactly is Flood Zone X. Sometimes people call it a low-risk flood zone, which is very scary because almost 30% of flood claims come out of this area. But according to the federal government, these are considered to be lower risk areas. These are areas where if you have a mortgage, generally, flood insurance is not going to be required. That's great news for property value and things like that. Now, historically, when it came to pricing in Flood Zone X, it was some of the cheapest flood insurance out there. You had what was called preferred rates. So you may be able to get flood insurance for less than $500 a year with a Flood Zone X. Now, we don't see this anymore, especially with the federal government, because they're not generally using flood zones anymore for flood insurance rates. But when it comes to pricing a Flood Zone X, these areas still can have some of the cheapest flood insurance premiums out there. This is how I got my $300 rate many years ago. I was in the wrong flood zone, and when they changed it to Flood Zone X, I was able to get my rate from about $3,000 down to $300. So as you can see, it can make a big difference. So that's a little bit on pricing of what Flood Zone X is. You know, we've also already talked briefly about requirements. Are banks going to require flood insurance in Flood Zone X? And the simple answer is generally no, because this is not considered to be part of the high-risk area or the special flood hazard area. So we've talked about pricing a little bit. We've talked about requirements. Let's talk about flood insurance options. If your community participates in the National Flood Insurance Program, which is about 95% of communities across the country, then you've got two options. You've got the National Flood Insurance Program and you've got private flood insurance. These are generally going to be your two options. Now, it's important to understand in Flood Zone X, no matter where you go with the federal program, rates should be the same if you're getting the same coverages. So let's briefly talk about some of those coverages that are available. With the federal program, you've got up to $250,000 on a building, and you've got $100,000 on contents. Now, it's important to understand that generally, the federal program is not going to cover replacement costs on contents. This means that you could be very disappointed come claims time if you're trying to get money for things that you just bought a year ago. You're gonna have to pay a depreciation and things like that. Now, what about private flood insurance? You know, private flood insurance is completely different. You know, you may get 10 different options out there when it comes to pricing, when it comes to coverages. You know, each company's gonna kind of depend on what they can provide. And that's why it's really important when you're out there maybe shopping for insurance. And in the link below, you can actually download our free ebook we have for you on things to know before purchasing flood insurance that we have put down there just for this situation. And it talks about things like pricing, especially with private flood insurance, how things are so different. You know, it may be all over the table here. While with the federal program where you may only get $250,000, with a private flood insurance option, you may be able to get up until $1 million, $2 million. In fact, we've seen up to $4 million in coverage in some situations. On contents, you may be able to get replacement costs. Also, one coverage that private flood insurance companies offer, federal program does not, is additional living expenses. This is huge. We actually had a customer in Nebraska who had this with a private company. And what it did is it helped pay for her hotel for 6 months when her house was being repaired. That was something her neighbors didn't have with a federal policy. So that's a very big benefit of coverages with the federal program. So today on Flood Zone X, we have talked about pricing. We have talked about coverages. We've talked about your flood insurance options. And we've talked about requirements when it comes to your banks. So, if you want to learn more about all the different flood zones out there, you can click up here in the corner of our video on understanding flood zones. Also, if you like this video or you think it could provide value to someone else, make sure to share it with someone. Make sure to like, subscribe to our channel as we provide all these different videos. You can also stay tuned in the next video as well and click on the corner where we're going to discuss Flood Zone A. My name's Chris Green, president and owner of the Flood Insurance Guru, and I want to say thank you for tuning in today's video on what is Flood Zone X.